story of fire, blood, and a fallen city. The year was 1945. The world had been at war for 6 long, devastating years. Europe was a continent of ruin and ash. Cities that once pulsed with life were now shadows of themselves.
In the Pacific, battles had become endless, island by island, pain by pain. And in Southeast Asia, one city stood at the center of a coming storm. That city was Manila.
Once called the Pearl of the Orient, Manila had been a jewel of culture, trade, and beauty.
Mag-ingat, papapin na, magasok-gasalo!
Keikoku suru, ugoki o tomeo.
Its streets were a layered history. Spanish Baroque beside American avenues, old brick beside new concrete, horse-drawn carriages and automobiles moved in the same space. Street vendors called out. Children chased each other in plazas. The sea laughed against the bay at dusk. It was a city that breathed, quietly, loudly, filled with light, until the world's fires came closer. A city before the storm. Picture a late afternoon along the bay. Families gather to watch the sun sink slow in gold. The scent of garlic and frying fish drifts on the breeze. A bell tolls from a Spanish church, counting out time that feels endless and safe. Merchants fold fabric by hand. Old men sit and talk. Women trade recipes and gossip. Children run barefoot. This is the Manila that people remember. Small, ordinary moments stacked like bricks, each one a story, each one fragile. The city's architecture told those stories. Libraries, theaters, stone churches, and open-air markets. All of it, a living record of centuries. When people met, they argued about small things. The price of fish, the best route through the noon traffic, the day's weather. The great, slow rhythms of everyday life were trusted, familiar. And then the world changed those rhythms. 3 years earlier, in 1942, the Philippines had fallen to the Empire of Japan. After months of brutal fighting, American and Filipino forces were forced to surrender. The memory of that defeat was still raw. The marches, the hunger, the long trails of bodies and loss. Even the name of some events carried pain, a province remembered for a single, terrible walk, Bataan. Under occupation, Manila changed. Food grew scarce, curfews tightened the night. People moved like shadows through their own streets. Churches became more than sanctuaries. They were places of quiet fear. Guerrilla networks formed in basements and hills. Underground papers slid between hands. Teachers and priests did what they could, quietly, risking everything. Courage took subtle forms, a loaf of bread shared, a secret map passed to a neighbor, a whispered warning to a child. In late 1944, the tide of war shifted. Forces from across the ocean returned. The name of one commander carried a promise that had been spoken years earlier. Douglas MacArthur stepped back onto Philippine soil at Leyte. People of the Philippines, I have returned. The sight of flags and ships brought hope, small and bright, to people who had learned to keep hope hidden. Push toward Luzon began. Plans moved from maps to trenches to marching feet. Supplies and soldiers built up outside the city. And in Manila, men and women listened, waiting and fearing what would come out.
Stay close, don't make a sound.
I see soldiers ahead.
We must find shelter.
Not every commander agreed on how to fight. Strategy and pride clashed. One leader argued to withdraw, to take the battle to the mountains and fight from positions he could control. Another refused to leave the city he had been ordered to abandon.
We must hold the city at all costs. No, a withdrawal is the only way. Folly! Cowardice! Folly!
Tomoyuki Yamashita wanted to preserve forces and wage a campaign in the hills. But Sanju Abuchi hardened his jaw and stayed. He took the city and tried to make it into something else. A fortress. Things became weapons. Churches, hospitals, and schools were turned into defensive positions. Were wired. Walls became barriers. The city's bones were turned against the people who lived inside them. Imagine the city changing overnight. Market stalls shuttered. Guards with rifles moved in formation where citizens once moved in crowds. Street you walked every week, where now had sandbags and machine guns. The old rhythm was gone. The city's dress became gray and prepared for war. And all the while, nearly 1 million civilians lived inside that changing map, unsure of which house would be a sanctuary and which would be a trap. They carried stories, recipes, names, laughter, grief, packed light as they could, but the weight of fear sat heavy.
On February 3, 1945, American forces entered the northern outskirts of Manila. Tanks rolled through quiet streets. Soldiers moved cautiously past shattered buildings. The first hours were strange, little resistance, like the city was holding its breath. Then the calm snapped. Fighting came in patches. Japanese naval units refused to yield. Snipers waited in towers. Artillery hid behind stone facades. Blocks that had been neighborhoods became killing grounds. The noise grew. Distant booms, sharper cracks, the steady staccato of gunfire in alleys.
Fire! Keep the pin down! Do not go first! Hey!
This was not only a fight between armed men, it became a fight against the city itself. It would be remembered as terrible chapters. Civilians were caught in lines of fire, and worse, thousands of men, women, and children were killed across neighborhoods. Families who fled to churches believed they would be safe. Some never left those doors again. The city's cries were not just from collapsing stone, but from people's lives being taken. The name Manila Massacre holds that weight, a label that tries to contain a storm of sorrow. People's faces blurred into statistics. But each statistic was a story. A hand that used to cook, a child who liked stamping in puddles, an old man who whistled in the morning. The city's life was being erased. For the attacking forces, the problem was clear and terrible. To save Manila from permanent occupation, they would have to destroy it. Heavy artillery was used to break fortified buildings. Tanks blasted through walls. Flamethrowers cleared rooms where soldiers hid. The historic district of Intramuros, the heart of the old city, became ground zero for the fiercest fighting. Imagine centuries of history burning in a few weeks. Imagine libraries turning to smoke. Imagine walls that had held records of generations collapsing. Inside the ancient walls, the fighting was up close and personal.
Soldiers crawled room to room, the sound of footsteps and breathing mixed with artillery booms. Stone facades shattered. Cathedrals, places meant for prayer, rang with gunfire. Scenes were almost apocalyptic. Walls crumbled, roofs fell in.
The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of fear. Men fought in distances of feet and inches, separated only by doorways and blown-out arches. The close-quarter nature of this fighting made it impossible to take a single step without danger.
Jump right, flank!
When the smoke cleared on March 3, 1945, the city was declared liberated. The word liberated hung in the air like a promise and a wound at once.
Soldiers hoisted flags. Bells rang. People came into streets numb with shock. Over 100,000 Filipino civilians had died.
Some estimates are higher. Many were massacred. Many more were the victims of crossfire, collapsing buildings, and starvation. The city lay in ruins. 80% of Manila had been destroyed.
Art, libraries, and the architecture of generations were gone.
Manila was, in the scale of the war, the second most devastated Allied capital after Warsaw. Justice followed in courts. Tomoyuki Yamashita would later be tried and executed for war crimes. But courts could not stitch back burned pages or return a child's toys from the river. Survivors picked through rubble. They rebuilt homes by hand.
The Battle of Manila was not just a military event, it was a warning. When cities are made into fortresses, when pride or fear turns homes into targets, the cost falls on those least able to defend themselves. The lesson is hard and clear. War in cities destroys culture, memory, and the small life, ordinary things that make life meaningful. This story is not unique. Wars in Warsaw, in other capitals, carry similar echoes, but every city's sorrow is its own. Manila's sorrow rings with voices that do not fade. Yet even in that darkness there were bright acts. Filipino guerrillas guided troops through secret routes. Nurses and doctors risked their own lives to carry patients out of burning hospitals. Families hid neighbors in basements and behind false walls. Small acts of bravery kept stories alive. These acts did not erase loss, but they kept some people from vanishing into silence. Remember this. Courage often looked like choosing to share the last of a family's food. It looked like a whisper that said, "Go now," and a hand that closed over a child's eyes. Walk through the restored lanes of the old city today, and you see life moving. People eat at cafes, students push bicycles past stone walls, churches ring bells. The plaza benches hold lovers and elders, but the stones hold memory. The city is not the same. Nothing can truly replace what was lost. Every year, commemorations remind new generations. They teach children the names, the dates, the small everyday stories that make memory human. The Battle of Manila taught a hard truth. Liberation can be a Pyrrhic thing, victory that costs too much. Yet the courage of the people, their patient rebuilding, and their choice to remember instead of letting the past rot in silence, is its own kind of triumph. Cities can be rebuilt. Memory can be honoured. People can choose to keep telling the story. History often speaks in dates and numbers, but behind those numbers were mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, ordinary people whose lives were caught in the crossfire of global ambition. Names that should be said, faces that should be seen, small acts that should be remembered. And that is the true story of Manila in 1945, a city that burned, a people who endured, and a memory that refuses to fade. We remember, we rebuild, we remain.